this is a perfect opportunity to just talk a little bit about, maybe let's start with your background, Bob. Of course, you've been on the show. We've talked about the work you've done at the Woodson Center, but just give us a thumbnail of, how you came into this from the beginning.
Well, first of all, I was born in South Philadelphia, the youngest of 5 children, to a mother with a 5th grade education. My dad was a laborer, very strong, got a job at a time when blacks did not drive trucks from the dairies, from the train to the dairies. And he took the job, and he had to fight his way to keep it. They say, you can have it if you can keep it. He's a very strong-willed guy, but...
Because this is under Jim Crow, basically.
Yeah, this was in Jim Crow, 1937, in the midst of the Depression and also Jim Crow. And he was had some war-related wounds. He fought in the First World War with New York Hellcats, Harlem Hellcats. But he had some chronic problems. It resulted in him dying when I was about 9. Leaving my mother with 5 children to raise in this neighborhood. But again, it was secure. And so I had to rely upon my peers as an alternative family. And so I gained an appreciation why kids join gangs. But I was blessed to be equipped with the kind of values that I chose good friends. And there are 3 of us left today. When they were a year older than me and they dropped, so they went into college, and I was unaffiliated, and so I dropped out and went into the Air Force in 1954. I was in the space program, and the Air Force saw things in me, and I went to college. While I was in the Air Force, University of Miami, 12 credits. Only I had to be taught on the base because I couldn't walk on campus. I have 12 credits from University of Miami at a time when I could not walk on the campus. So I knew what racism was all about. Long story short, after I got out, I worked my way through college, went to a black college. Thank God it wasn't affirmative action that would have put me at Penn. But I went to a small black college, Cheney, where I got the kind of intellectual nurturing that I needed that prepared me for a full scholarship to the University of Pennsylvania. Got involved in the civil rights movement, but became very disenchanted when I realized that there was a bait and switch game going on where we used the demographics of poor blacks to promote remedies. And when funding came, it did not go to poor blacks. It went to middle-class providers. So I left the civil rights movement following the death of Dr. King and began to work on behalf of low-income people of all races. And so I have been singularly focused on serving the needs of the least of God's children. Which means that I have to be clear and constant in that commitment. And so therefore, I thought it was necessary to be humble, but also, in the words of Dr. King, be open to self-criticism. So those are the principles that have guided my work. So that I have worked now on behalf of low-income people since the late 60s. I have worked on behalf of low-income people of all races. I worked with Native Americans on takeover of Alcatraz. I worked with Cesar Chavez and helped him get farm workers, help them to acquire a medical facility, affordable, to help farm workers. So my work has singularly been concentrating on the class issue, and that's what's missing today.
And if I may add, through this unique approach of going into communities that are, let's call it disadvantaged, I don't know what term you're supposed to use, and finding people that are succeeding there and empowering them.
For many years, the name of my organization had the word enterprise in it. It was only changed to the Woodson Center for the past 6 years because my name is more associated with the principles than enterprise. But the reason I selected it is because the same principles that work in the market economy work in the social economy. And so what the Woodson Center does, we go into low-income communities with sort of like a venture capitalist without capital. We go into there and we look for social entrepreneurs, people who were in prison, people who had overcome tremendous odds in their lives. They were alcoholics, they were prostitutes. Through God's grace, they became redeemed. and they use their redemptive qualities to influence others. And this is where Josh and I come together, because a lot of conservatives believe that the way you change people is to teach them. And so there's a great reliance on intellectual white papers, and if we just have the right policies, then people's practice will change. Well, to me, I understood that values are not taught, they're caught. Mm-hmm. And so grassroots leaders are able to redeem and promote redemption and reform of individuals by actually modeling the kind of values that they want people to emulate. And as a consequence, I have been a party to the restoration of whole communities just based upon the enterprising work of 3 or 4 people. They're able to affect hundreds. And so the Woodson Center has been there to not only document it, but also provide access to capital. So 2 things that a venture capitalist brings to an enterprise. They bring capital, but they also bring managerial expertise, because entrepreneurs are poor bookkeepers. And grassroots people are poor bookkeepers. And so what the Woodson Center does is provide training and also access to capital, so they can take what works for 10 people and affect 1,000. But the qualities that make these grassroots healing agents effective makes them invisible. And that's because elitism prevents both conservatives and liberals looking to them, to untutored people, as a source of solution. That's why I say there is wisdom that is learned and the wisdom that is earned. Mm. Grassroots people earn their wisdom, and therefore what we as a society can benefit from them, but they're ignored as a source of new insight. And that's why this administration is in a position to really harvest that knowledge and put these people to work healing this community, this society. If a mother who lost 2 sons in a toxic, violent neighborhood were able to forgive the people who committed these crimes and turned that pain into purpose and caused 20 other moms to find healing, perhaps they have something to teach a middle-class mother who lost a child to suicide. Mm-hmm. And so the biggest challenge we're facing is a moral and spiritual freefall that is consuming people of all races and all colors. But we're not going to be able to find the source of this solution if we are separated by race, and that's why we must become post-racial.
The question is, what kind of knowledge does a democracy need to thrive? And there's 2 choices. It's either this invisible knowledge, this practical, hands-on experience, or it's intellectual policy knowledge. And the greatest mind, I think, of the 19th century, Alexis de Tocqueville, who wrote Democracy in America, saw this very, very clearly. The Europeans, he said, are looking over the Atlantic and saying, these people have no philosophers, no great artists, no great literary figures. And Tocqueville said, yes, but they have this invisible reservoir of practical experience, and that's why they can build a democracy and Europe cannot. So Bob and I met at a think tank, which will go unnamed, and we were listening to the presentation, and he caught my eye, I caught his eye. And I should say, I had just come back. I'd been in the Middle East I'm still with Georgetown, but took many years off and went to the Middle East to help build programs. And then I left Georgetown for 2 years and went to Iraq to help build the American University of Iraq and Kurdistan. And it was a winner-take-all political arrangement. And I said to the students, we're not going to do winner-take-all. There's an orphanage down the road. They need help in learning English, and I'm going to force you to go down, and we're going to do this thing called civic associations, mediating institutions. And they looked at me and they said, what's that? And I realized then, even though I had been a Tocqueville scholar for many, many years, I realized then that the key to building a democracy is you must have this non-political a space where people can demonstrate their competence and become leaders in their community. And so when I came back and Bob and I were looking at each other across the table, I heard Bob talk and I said, this is the living embodiment of what Tocqueville has been saying. And it's unfortunate because in the 1990s, before 9/11, there was and Bob was part of this, a growing convergence left and right. After the Berlin Wall fell, people on the left and even people on the right began to see that the key to revitalizing America would be revitalizing the mediating institutions, the families, the churches, the local groups, etc. And then 9/11 hit. And everything was about consolidation of power at the level of the state. And we developed what could be called the national security state. What we're realizing now is that the cost of this for 20 years plus is that people have become lonely, isolated. We've got depression rates that are through the roof. We've got citizens who think they only can look to the state to take care of them, and yet Bob's groups show us that in fact is not the case. And so we need to completely revitalize America, and the key is not going to be another policy white paper. The key is going to be recognizing that what we need is already there. We just need to look for it and find it and support it. This is the way we go forward. I mean, it's the corollary to rebuilding the middle class. We have to do what the Doge people are saying, which is we have to cut back federal government spending. But the only way we can do that is if we have a compensating increase in the social capital that Bob keeps talking about. And so we have to find these local groups, these local people, everywhere in our community. This is not a national problem, this is a local problem. We need to find these people, we need to support them. The government can be a supplement to that effort, but can't be a substitute for that effort. So we're at this remarkable moment when we're talking about reducing federal spending, when we have levels of despair and depression because the state has become this administrative behemoth, making citizen competence impossible. So we've got this invitation, literally, to return to the founder's vision where we have citizen competence. The only way you can have small government is if you have massive citizen competence, and that's developing this invisible knowledge, which Bob's groups have been doing for 40 years.
There are two ways that you can prevent someone from competing. The first is by law. That's what segregation was all about. But the second one is more insidious, is tell them you don't have to compete.
We'll take care of you.
We'll take care of you. Black America, listen, you don't have to compete. After all, the legacy of slavery, if you're having babies out of wedlock, destroying each other through violence, it's not your fault. It's a legacy of slavery and Jim Crow. And therefore, whites are responsible for your condition. And unless they change, there's little you can expect to do.